Good morning. We'll be doing Chapter 1, the corporation and its stakeholders. The key learning objectives for this class are understanding the relationship between business and society and the ways in which they are part of an interactive system, considering the purpose of the modern corporation, knowing what is a stakeholder and who a corporation's market and non-market and internal and external stakeholders are, conducting a stakeholders analysis, and understanding the basis of stakeholder interests and power, recognizing the diverse ways in which modern corporations organize internally to interact with various stakeholders, analyzing the forces of change that continually reshape the business and society relationship. Introduction: the business and and society relationship. We're now on slide 3. Business is any organization that is engaged in making a product or providing a service for a profit. Society, human beings, and the social structure they collectively create. Point number 3 in slide number 3, business and society are highly interdependent. Move on to slide 4, introduction, the business and society relationship. We borrow general systems theory from biology to explain the relationships, first introduced in the 1940s. This theory posits that organisms cannot be understood in isolation, even though they have clear boundaries. They can only be understood in relationship to their surroundings. The same is true with business. The only way we can understand business is with its surroundings with society. To adapt to management theory means that business firms are embedded in a broader social environment with which they constantly interact. Business and society together form an interactive social system, shown graphically in the following slide. Please refer to the next slide for the graph. We move on to slide number 6. 2 critical questions. What is the purpose of the modern corporation? To whom or what should the firm be responsible? Slide 7. 2 contrasting views. Ownership theory of the firm, also called property or finance theory. The firm is seen as the property of its owners, shareholders, the people that invest in the company. It argues that owners' interests are paramount and take precedence over the interests of others. The purpose of the firm is to maximize its long-term market value, that is, to make the most money it can for shareholders. That was definitely the prevailing view in the early 1900s and late 1800s. Stakeholder theory of the firm, slide number 8. This argues the corporation serves a broader purpose to create value for society. It must take profit for owners to survive, however, creates other kinds of value too. Corporations have multiple obligations. All stakeholder groups must be taken into account. Core arguments for stakeholder theory of the firm. Descriptive, more or less the description of how companies really work. Instrumental, more effective corporate strategy. And then finally, normative, stakeholder management is the right thing to do. That concludes slide number 9. We move on to slide 10. Titled, the stakeholder concept. A stakeholder refers to persons or groups that affect or are affected by an organization's decisions, policies, and operations. A stake is an interest in or claim on a business enterprise. Businesses are embedded in networks that involve many groups with such a stake. We now conclude slide 10. The stakeholder concept, a tip for understanding. Slide 11. First point, term stakeholder is not the same as a stockholder. Words sound similar but are not the same. Stockholders are one of several kinds of stakeholders. Stakeholders are the groups or individuals that have a claim on the organization. We conclude slide 11. We move on to slide number 12. Different kinds of stakeholders. Stakeholder groups can be divided into 2 categories. Market stakeholders, non-market stakeholders. Again, those are market stakeholders and non-market stakeholders. Slide number 13, market stakeholders. Market stakeholders are those that engage in economic transactions with the company as it carries out its primary purpose of providing society with goods and services. Slide 14, non-market stakeholders. Those are people or groups who, although they do not engage in direct economic exchange with the firm, are affected by or can affect its actions. Further distinction, slide 15. Internal stakeholders are those such as employees and managers who are employed by the firm. They are inside the firm in the sense that they contribute their effort and skill, usually at a company worksite. External stakeholders are those who, although they may have important transactions with the firm, are not directly employed by it. Figure 1.2, the stakeholders of business, slide 16. Internal stakeholders. Market share stakeholders would be employees and managers. External stakeholders, stockholders, customers, creditors, suppliers, wholesale and retailers. They are non-market stakeholders. For example, governments, communities, non-governmental organizations, business support groups, media, and competitors. Again, let us review. Internal stakeholders, our market stakeholders would be employees and managers. External stakeholders, which will also be a part of the market stakeholders grouping, stockholders, customers, creditors, suppliers, wholesalers, and retailers. Non-market stakeholders on the external end would be governments, because they're not employed by the company. They used to be in Tammany Hall and all those other corrupt eras in time, but today government is separate, obviously. Communities, non-governmental organizations, business support groups, media, and competitors. That concludes slide number 16. We move on to slide 17. Slide 17 is figure 1.3, a firm and its stakeholders. It is a model of the business vis-a-vis all the stakeholders that we had mentioned before. We move on to slide 18. Stakeholder analysis. It is part of every manager's job, process whereby managers identify relevant stakeholders and analyze their interest and power. Ask yourself 4 questions. Who are the relevant stakeholders? What are the interests of each stakeholder? What is the power of each stakeholder? How are coalitions likely to form? Slide 19, stakeholder analysis, question 1. Who are the relevant stakeholders? Answer this question by drawing market and non-market stakeholder maps, similar to the figure we mentioned before, several slides ago. Recognize that not all of groups are relevant to every situation. Examples, some businesses sell directly to the public and will not have retailers. A certain stakeholder may not be relevant to a particular decision or action. Slide 20. Question number 2 for stakeholder analysis. What are the interests of each stakeholder? Analyzing stakeholder interests includes addressing what are the group's concerns, what does the group want, expect from the relationship with the firm. Example, stockholders have an ownership interest. They expect to receive dividends and capital appreciation. Customers are interested in gaining fair value and quality in goods and services they purchase. Public interest groups advance broad social interests. Slide 21. Stakeholder analysis. Question 3. What is the power of each stakeholder? Stakeholder power is the ability of a group to use resources to make an event happen or to secure a desired outcome. There are 4 types of stakeholder powers: voting power, economic power, political power, legal power, and informational power. We move on to slide 22. Stakeholder analysis, question number 4. How are stakeholder coalitions likely to form? Stakeholder groups often have common interests and will form temporary alliances to pursue these common interests. Coalitions are dynamic. They can change at any time. Coalitions are increasing internationally. Internet has enabled coalitions to form quickly across political boundaries, especially with the recent advent of heavy usage of social media. International alliances, coupled with media interest, can be a very powerful strategic force for companies. That concludes slide 22. Slide 23, stakeholder salience and mapping. Salient stands out from a background, is seen as important or draws attention. Stakeholders stand out, meaning they are salient to managers when they have power, legitimacy, and urgency. Managers can use the salience concept to develop a stakeholder map, a graphical representation of the relationship of stakeholder salience to a particular issue, to see who is strong and who needs to be contended with. A stakeholder map is a useful tool because it enables managers to see quickly how stakeholders feel about an issue and create a list of priorities. Slide 24 is an example of a stakeholder map. Please refer to that, figure 1.4. Slide 25, the corporation's boundary spanning departments. Boundary spanning departments, shown graphically in the following slide. Departments or offices within an organization that reach across a dividing line that separates the company from groups and people in society. Building positive and mutually beneficial relationships across organizational boundaries is a growing part of a management's role. Again, building positive and mutual beneficial relationships across organizational boundaries is a growing part of management's role. Slide 26 is a graph of the corporation's boundary spanning departments. So, for example, mentioning stockholders, shareholder relations, investor relations. They have an external and internal audit procedure, SEC filings, compliance, communications, proxy election management. Let's look at the bottom on the environment. Environment, health and safety, sustainability. The EPA and state environmental compliance. They deal with that. Internal environmental auditing, recycling, take back. Look at the other examples on your own. Slide 27, the dynamic environment of business. The external environment of business is dynamic and ever-changing. The purpose of the firm is not simply to make a profit, but to create value for all its stakeholders. A successful business must meet both its economic and social objectives. 6 dynamic group forces powerfully shape the business and society relationship. Changing societal expectations, growing emphasis on ethical reasoning and actions, globalization, evolving government regulations and business response, dynamic natural environment, explosion of new technology, and innovation. Figure 1.6, slide 28, forces that shape the business, forces that shape the business and society relationship. We mentioned before, growing emphasis on ethical values, evolving government regulation and business, globalization, explosion of new technology, dynamic natural environment. All these shape and change business and stakeholder relationship. That concludes this chapter. Thank you for coming and listening.